You're live. Okay. So I'll just be cautious of. Maybe I can mute it right now.
Sure. Nothing. Red in particular, everything is so it's essential.
Maybe. Hey, did you get somewhere? Yes. Okay, just get you. Hey. Nice. Okay, now we just gotta. Oh, it's a little delay. What?
You're such a
Well, Mr. K is supposed to come to Drakenberg.
It says you're live. Okay, it is live and it is showing.
Wait, so
And
are we
it's not
live
muted
streaming
right now.
this?
Yes, you are.
Okay, well. Hey, here's my spiel, my disclaimer every time, right? Oh, before that, I found TNT Minecraft Anyways, I couldn't help myself, but you can't help yourself to it later. I'm like, isn't that weird? So we had hot dogs.
The hot dog ones were so scary because they tasted exactly like a hot dog.
Okay, anyways, sorry. Okay, welcome to Thesis. My disclaimers this morning are the same as always. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being the audience. As you know, Berenice has worked all year on her thesis. So I ask that everyone be kind and courteous and respectful during the presentation. Refrain from speaking, refrain from moving around or drinking water. Also refrain from eating and rustling things. So if you grab a snack, I'm going to ask you to refrain from eating it during her presentation, okay? If these things I'm asking you to do are difficult to do, I will ask you to leave and then I will no longer invite you back to another piece. Just as kind and courtesy respect to our presentation. Any questions? Okay. So we will begin when Mrs. Drakenberg is here. We'll have her. Okay. Thank you. The format will go as Berenice will do the presentation. Analysts will ask her some probing questions, and if there is time, we'll open up to the audience. Okay, and as always, be kind and courteous and respectful with your questions. Oh, you this slide you can keep going. You need to next. There it is. Mrs. Drakenberg, will you do us the honor of being on our panelist? Panel?
Love to.
I mean, I can do it if you don't want to.
Justice, can you shut up the light? Because she's like nervous.
Just so that when we're looking at that, we're also looking at you. I'll start with you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Panelists, thank you. I'm shaking it. Thank you for making time to make this my presentation. Okay, so today's topic is going to be about ocean pollution and man's duty to preserve Earth's beauty. Our oceans are not just vast bodies of water, but they're a testament of God's creativity and His love He has for all of us. So the reason why we should care for God's creation is because the Bible mandates it. It's our responsibility. It affects humans. It affects everyone around us, our neighbors, and also it affects marine life as well, which is pretty obvious. And we'll also be going over what you can do in your daily lives. Okay. Our biblical duty. In Genesis 1:26, it says, "Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let him have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." So this is saying, it's basically just like God gives us dominion over the earth to care for it and to be its stewards and protect it. And then this is reinforced in Genesis 2:15 when it said, "The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till and keep it." By keeping it, it means to protect it and preserve its beauty and ensure that it's healthy. And then again in the Bible, it said in Psalm 19:1, it says, "The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims His handiwork." This is basically just saying that the earth is meant to portray God's beauty, and it's meant to preserve God's beauty. And Saint Hildegard of Bingen also reinforces this when she says, "The whole world is a mirror of God's beauty." It's also nice in your quote. They're basically just saying, this is one of the top reasons why we should want the earth to be beautiful, to reflect His glory and His mercy. And Pope Francis, as well, in a book he wrote, Laudato Si, he mentions how our home is falling into serious despair, which is a direct quote. He acknowledges that this is a problem, and he says our home is beginning to look more and more like an immense pile of filth, which is kind of a big deal. And he asked everyone to take decisive action in order to fulfill our responsibility here on earth. But another reason is because it harms humans. So as you can see here, this little kid, he's probably has to do this in order to survive, and it's not right that our actions are causing this. There's about 75 to 199 million tons of plastic in the ocean, which is exactly 2,000 pounds. And these plastics eventually break down into microplastics, which affect the fish, affect humans. And it gets into our bloodstreams when we consume fish that have also been living in these microplastic filled waters. This can lead to all sorts of cancers, infertilities, and also affect our nervous systems as well. There are some extreme cases where people have been paralyzed from it, which is an extreme case, but it's still possible. Another reason is because 3 billion people depend on the ocean for their lives, whether that be getting food to eat, getting food to eat or selling the fish. There's been declining fish stocks and job losses because people aren't able to catch fish as often as they were able to before, so they can't rely on it as much as they used to. So here you can see how long it takes for things to degrade, and eventually to compose, and eventually these things become microplastics as they went over. And take 450 years to break down a plastic bottle. Like, the ones that are here. No judgment. And in order to care for these people that are suffering, not able to have food, not able to have money from their fishing jobs, the Bible calls us to love our neighbor in Matthew 22:39. Jesus says that it's the second greatest commandment, which is kind of a big deal, second greatest. Another reason is because there's an emotional toll on humans. I know that kind of sounds like, my emotions affected, but there are certain people who it's called eco-anxiety. It's not like an official thing yet, but now that this is starting to pop up in more people, it's becoming more evident. It's defined by grief over loss of natural beauty, or like people are stressed because they see how bad everything is getting. The American Psychology Association defines it as a chronic fear of environmental cataclysm that comes from observing the degradation of the environment. Another reason is because there's this thing called mercury pollution. Yeah, mercury poisoning, It's a toxic chemical that builds up in fish, and it's from fertilizers entering the oceans, and it comes into their systems, and then we, as fish consumers, eat that mercury. And eventually, all the fish are going to have this mercury in their system if we don't take action now, because it's starting like with the smaller fish, and then it just goes up the food chain. And this is a chart of there's around a 50% population loss of fish, which that part is about the job losses. People aren't able to, as I said, accumulate as many fish. And then this is a quote. In Japan, there is a fishing village named Minamata. The village is in a bay on the ocean. Fishermen for centuries have fed their families with fish caught in this bay. But in the 1950s, something very strange began to happen. The cats would dance crazily until they were dead. It wasn't until the late 60s that the reason was understood. A chemical company named Kizo had been dumping chemical waste into the bay. The mercury in the waste, which is in the fertilizers, was poisoning the water, the fish, the cats who ate the fish, and the people who lived there as well. Kizo refused to take responsibility. W. Eugene Smith began photographing the factory dumping waste into the bay and the effects the chemicals were having on people in this area. Smith took this photo of a mother bathing her 17-year-old daughter Tomoko is not looking at the ceiling. She was born blind. She's also speechless. Notice at 17 that she has no breasts. Her hands are just claws. Even though she is tiny, her deformed legs cannot hold her up. This is a result of mercury poisoning. This picture was published around the world, and Kizo was finally forced to clean up the bay. But the water was finally declared safe in 1997. But by then, the mercury had killed Tomoko. I've shown you this saddening picture because I want you to understand that unless people know the truth of the things that are going on, unless you guys see it, things aren't going to change. And how it harms marine life. About 80% of marine pollution is plastic pollution, and what makes up the plastic pollution every year is 8 million tons of plastic that enter the ocean. And you may be asking, how does this affect the animals? They confuse the plastic and waste as food. Like those plastic bags that they have at the grocery store can be they can confuse them for jellyfish as they're just floating in the water. And seabirds also, they can't really inspect what they're about to eat because they dig into the water and they end up eating a lot of bottle caps. And apart from plastic pollution, there's just cigars that are left by people. There's this patch of plastic in the center of not in the center, but in the ocean. It's twice the size of Texas, and it's between Hawaii and California. It's 1.6 square kilometers, and this is just accumulated through the currents and the way they work. They all meet at a certain point, and they bring with them the waste that people dump in the ocean. And then there's also light pollution. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. It's where, well, I'll give you a specific example. There's these baby sea turtles. They swim to the ocean once they hatch on the beach, usually at night, and the moon is the brightest source that they follow in order to get to the ocean. But because there's been a lot of, increase in usage of light, they crawl towards land, and they don't end up surviving because of predation, and then they starve because they think they're going the right way, but they're not. And also there's in kelp forests and stuff, or anywhere really in the ocean, the light is messing with their circadian rhythm. They don't know when to rest. They don't know really when to eat because the light for them determines when they get to eat. There's also noise pollution. Noise pollution comes from whether it be cruises, military sonar. It affects the communication of dolphins, whales, because they use echolocation. And sometimes it gets too painful for them to the point where they beach themselves. They basically commit suicide because the pain is too much to bear. And the next is fossil fuel drilling for gases and stuff. I'm sure you guys have heard there's many oil spills that happen because there's mistakes. It's not on purpose, but if people weren't drilling for oil, this wouldn't need to happen. It mainly affects birds because they get drenched in this oil and then their feathers, because of the way they work, they can't really fly and they just drown. This also affects all animals, not just birds, but that's the main one. That's why you see on the dawn, they shelf a duck, so you can wash off the oil. And then next is, I don't know if you've heard of dead zones. There are areas in the ocean where fish can't survive because there's not enough nutrients for them. There's either not enough or too many. It's mainly from the nitrogen that's in fertilizers that makes it back into the ocean. And in the Gulf of Mexico, there's a dead zone that's 6,000 square miles, which is pretty big. Um, yeah, so this is a Gulf of Mexico, and this entire area is just a dead zone, the red and the green part, which is where fish can't survive. Next. Okay, so we have a seal. So I have volunteered to name our seal. Frederick? Okay, this is Frederick. He's a few months, he's still fluffy, he hasn't molted yet. Yeah, kind of cute. Due to recently, there's been an increase in algal blooms, which is where algae increases dramatically because there's an increase in carbon dioxide in the water, which causes it to just grow more rapidly, and it affects the acidification in the water, and that eventually affects specifically sea lions because it affects it causes a chemical imbalance. They suffer through these things called stargazing seizures, where they just their heads go up for an abnormal amount of time with their eyes closed, and they're having a seizure, so it's not like they're just resting, because that's what it may look like. And then they also they also have breathing issues because of this acidification, and they're also recently being reported of attacking humans, which they didn't used to do, but because their brain is being altered, they're not thinking straight. And then next, okay, one could say, if I don't see it, is it really that bad? Out of sight, out of mind is what people tend to live by. If something isn't visible to them, apparently it would hurt. If something isn't visible, it doesn't mean that it's not present to anyone. For example, the microplastics that I went through, they enter bloodstreams and they affect you, can cause cancer. Well, no, cancer isn't always visible. And then we're also called to care for the earth, so just because it's not around you doesn't mean you shouldn't care for it. Then the next thing someone could say is it really that bad? This is also caused from people not seeing it, so they just ignore it. But it is really that bad because there's half of the coral reefs that are gone because of pollution. It's something called coral bleaching, which is also caused by pollution. Then the dead zones that I also showed you that are the size of small states in the U.S. The whales bleaching themselves as well. And then that the seals are going crazy. The next thing someone could say is that it costs a lot because there is a lot of technology that needs to be used in order to clean it up. But as Pope Francis says in his book, it'll cause a lot more damage if you wait to clean it up, and it'll be more expensive in the future if you just decide to ignore it.
So fair to say, I really like the the variety of the different types of pollution. Right? Normally, most people think of the plastics, right? A lot of us may have heard of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, but bringing up the noise pollution, and the light pollution. A lot of people are thinking about part of those. And even the algae things, people, especially here, in the coast, they might think, oh, that's a good thing, yay, there's algae, whatever. They don't necessarily know that there's a big impact to those. So I really like that you include those in the presentation. Going back to the idea of the dead zones, do you think that they're would be a way to bring life back into those areas, if we were to find anything that might indicate that we could do that.
I wasn't able to find anything, but I think that if, science looks advanced far enough, they can come up with like different substances that combat what fertilizers are causing.
Following up from Mrs. Rice said, I do appreciate you covering the different kinds of pollution. Again, things I took for granted, didn't really think about, especially the impact that it had made on noise pollution. That was quite striking. What I was thinking about, you mentioned that dumping waste in the ocean, right, has a terribly negative impact, and you explained that well. What would you propose would be the opposite, the alternative to that? Just because there is a lot of waste that we're dealing with, especially with dealing energy management. Where do you think would be a good place? Just out of curiosity.
Well, there's a lot of places that like reuse their water. They clean it up with like chemicals and stuff, which isn't the best. But if we come to this point, we need to make some sacrifices. So I'd say that they can reuse different pollutants.
In particular, just like where it's like specific for that cause, right? For dumping.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Very nice. I really appreciated how you framed the conversation from a biblical perspective. What concrete changes are you recommending? Like, this is the problem. What things can we do to move the needle? What would you encourage us to do?
I'd encourage to use more reusable items like water bottles and such. Mrs. Rice got them out. Just like choosing to support sustainable companies, advocate for policies as well. And there's a lot more things that are reusable. Like I'm sure everyone's heard of like reusable straws. It does have an impact, although it got kind of annoying at one point. It definitely helps. And also just to educate others as well, like to spread awareness. Might not know anything, and just to pray as well, to seek guidance and to give you courage to start the trend of certain things. Because I know some people get anxious because they know other people aren't doing things, like aren't doing the same things. So yeah, just say, have courage to start.
And you mentioned, people that eat seafood, right, could be contaminated based on the plastics. What if somebody were to propose, I don't like seafood, therefore it has no impact on me or my family? How would you respond to that type of objection?
I respond with saying we're still required to love our neighbors, although it's not affecting us personally, it is affecting people next door, everyone, and so it's our responsibility to spread awareness.
If I could just kind of follow up too, take something that Mr. J said, do you think there's anything maybe like just here at SJA we might be able to, as like a school community, like come together and do to help the oceans?
I'd say we could do trash cleanups, like at beaches or around neighborhoods, because that eventually ends up in the ocean, and it can go for community service. Appreciate it.
So, piggybacking on what Dave said about I'd like to type in Bible scripture and substances. Now, some would say that since God gave us dominion over the earth and creatures, that we should be able to do whatever it is we want because we have dominion.
So it's definitely affecting poor communities, and although we can do whatever we want, we're still called to love everyone, and just as those poor people are being affected, we're called to love the poor as well and to support them in having a healthier life, having the privilege of being healthy that we get to have.
So it's like most of this pollution is industrial, right? how do we respond as individuals? Because we don't have control over those companies. But as an individual, what do I do? Like, what stake do I have in this? Because it's like I can say I love my neighbor, but I can't control what that company does.
So industrial waste is a part of pollution, but it's not everything. There are still things that we can do that will eventually help stop pollution or lessen pollution, because I feel like pollution is always going to be present, but we can lessen it.
Like, I know you mentioned like eco-friendly companies, recycling. Do you think that's enough for the average person to do?
Using more reusable products as well, so you're not producing as much waste that could end up in the ocean. Like cling wrap is a big one of them that everyone uses, but there are reusable options like wax paper, beeswax, where they can just wash and reuse, and that would help greatly in just switching to a more sustainable lifestyle.
And those tend to be really expensive,
Yes.
right? And difficult, like one is very expensive, so then as the average consumer, that would be very difficult for me, like a big burden for me. But then also, another burden would be that I have to wash it and clean it and then make sure my kids bring it home. Right? How do you change that kind of consumer mentality and allow, people to be able to have the courage or, be able to have that mindset to change that culture?
So the question is, how can we start using reusable products if there's still this like struggle? So
Yeah, because it's like it's real very expensive,
Yeah.
right? And then to get us to, it's a lot of work.
Mhm.
To wash it, to make sure it's not throw away.
Yeah.
Right. They don't have to seal everything properly.
Yeah. I definitely say it's for sure more difficult when you have younger kids. It's hard. You can start using it in your personal life, and then as your kids grow, bring it into their lives. Because I doubt like a second grader would keep remembering wash your wax paper,
So what I'm hearing you saying is like basically as adults or like young men and women, we can take responsibility ourselves. And hopefully that will change the culture as we get older and have our own families. One last question. So also, I noticed you're talking about like sonar and oil, and all those, and fertilizer, right? It's like, our ships need sonar to be able to travel, we need oil, to run our lives, right? And we need fertilizers to grow our food. So how do you propose, being able to reconcile the idea of having clean oceans, but also not kind of like decimating our way of life?
So you're focusing in particular on fertilizers
And like oil, and is it merely like the consumption? Is it bad in of itself, or is it the amount of consumption, right? Like, because it's like, we can hear that oil drilling is bad. We can hear that sonar is bad. We can hear that fertilizer is bad. But like we all drive cars. Like, do we just stop driving cars? Do we just stop like eating produce? Do we just do our naval systems have to find new ways of communicating? How does that look? Like we can recognize these are like harmful. How does that look? I mean, how do you think? For us as society, right?
It's not wrong as you're saying in and of itself, it's just the amount that it's being used. There's also electric cars that don't run on fossil fuels as well. Like communications through the definitely has to be another way found to communicate. But I doubt they'll be anytime soon. There has to be some advancements in.
So I guess it's like it's trying to seek new technologies that like that. Maybe by knowing, so maybe by like knowing and having awareness of the great issue, then we can push for like better renewable technologies. And so that we can still maintain our way of life, but
Yeah, there's also things that are being invented to replace fossil fuels for cars. There's this thing called plastiline. It's gas for cars made out of plastic. I don't think it's as sustainable because you're still burning things, but that still shows like an advancement slowly to a bigger step and stuff.
Okay, so one more, sorry. One more. So we are a coastal community. So I feel like your topic is very, it's like, for us, it's very important for us. In your research, did you find anything that was, like just for here, like that impacts us immediately in our own coastal community?
It's definitely the microplastics in fish because coastal communities tend to consume fish raw or consume fish in general.
Any industries do you see just locally? Do you see them being affected at all, or are we just like more economically, like vibrant that it doesn't affect?
I didn't see anything in my research about industries locally that are being affected with soft food.
So I was right, but yes, no, does the panel have any other questions?
I did recently see something that there's a company in Mexico where they've actually been able to take microplastics out of water. So so that could be interesting to, if you want to read up on that, kind of see what they're doing.
Okay, well, before I turn it over to the audience, thank you so much, Renise, for working on this and giving your time and effort into it and educating us more on this issue and framing it in a way where it's like, from scripture that I think, not only has dominion over it, but we are tasked with being stewards of it, right? So we are in that frame of mind that we are stewards of this earth and God's creation. And I feel like your what's it called, eco-stress? Eco-anxiety, that, like bringing that up, I've never heard of that before, so that was really interesting, and how that I can see correlating, with like us seeing the degradation of God's creation and how we are, made in union with that could cause us like stress, right? To see that happen. So thank you so much, and then I'll go from there.
So I feel like this solution to pollution is kind of going in circles. So if you want to get rid of the trash in the ocean, then maybe you can bury it and burn it, but that's also polluting the earth and the air, and then we can send out space. But then we just turn into a Wall-E situation. So what would you propose would be an actual concrete solution, even if it's small, to getting rid of plastics?
There are companies that reuse plastics and just reuse that plastic in making new things, whether that be shoes, jewelry. I've seen all that before. So I'd say, just supporting companies that reuse plastic. That's
Really good job, Bernice. It seems like you really researched this topic and put a lot of effort into it. My question just is, why did you choose this topic?
Well, my mom has always studied ocean. She's always been into ocean, anything, whether that's like just learning about the animal kind of thing. And she's really tried to bring a sustainable environment ever since I was younger. So that kind of inspired me to do this presentation because I know so much about it already. Just they're like casual dinner conversations.
Do you think the chances are good that Wally will happen?
I haven't seen Wally.
I haven't signed it for you.
Okay.
Alright, can I go for a second? What's your takeaway and, what's your message to them? What do you think you can convey so that it's strong enough whereas they can put their phone down and pay attention and maybe research? Maybe what you want from them, for them to do? All this pretty graphics and your research and all this years of throwing out people around you by burying all the birds that she sees on the street. She goes, where is she has them all lined up in the yard.
Okay.
So-
I just say do as much as you can in your daily lives until you're able to like live a partially sustainable life in today's world, because that's kind of hard to do. And just take small steps, as many as you can. And if you can't, as long as your intention isn't to like pollute the ocean, then I think just keep on trying to.
Hi, Miss Vivi. First off, I would like to commend you. You did a really great job, really well researched, and you spoke very, very eloquently, very neat, very nice. I liked your point that, like, yes, while we were given dominion over the world, the earth, it was still a gift, and we still have to treat it as such. But my question, I kind of laser focused in on that dead zone chart that you showed us, and it was like the red was more so around the U.S. So do you think the problem is like we're the main problem, the United States? Because I was looking at the Mexico and that was still green and blue. And so did you do any research on that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely Mexico and the US as well, because there are currents that move everything, so it definitely circles back to one area. And since Mexico is not as fortunate enough to have the technologies that we're starting to build up, it's definitely coming from Mexico for sure. And it's near Texas as well. We know Texas, they use a lot of, fertilizers because they produce a lot of crops and stuff.
And another thing, like, again, the same question, like, in comparison to other countries, do you think, like, we are the major problem, especially since, like, we're so advanced and all the technologies and stuff and all the resources we have?
So while I researched, I found the number one producer of pollutants is China,
Oh, okay.
and then the US. But the US does rely on China a lot for producing a lot of stuff. I don't know how that is now, but
Sure, yeah.
yeah, with all the politics going on.
Thank you.
Great research, but I just want to know, like, during the course of your research, did you see like any fish in the red zone that you think we consume a lot? And if there is, like, what do you think we can do about that?
Any fish that what?
Like we like humans eat a lot.
I didn't look into the fish that are in there, but definitely people don't eat from the dead zone because the dead zone. It's very deadly. Yeah.
Did you research and find out if all that time that we spent using paper straws actually did anything?
I didn't find any research, but it for sure did, because we started using paper straws because those became really evident the amount of plastic straws.
So do you support paper straws?
Actually, there's this new form of plastic that's like made out of, I believe it's corn. And that's kind of weird. It composes a lot faster, but not as fast as paper in your drink. So I support finding other alternatives.
Good.
Starbucks with their paper straw but plastic cup.
I want this straw.
No, it's part of the experience.
I fear that's part of the drinking experience.
You heard about the people who get like paralyzed from the pollution of the like mercury poisoning. How does the mercury poisoning
Where is it from?
Yeah, it's like from the polluting fish.
It comes from mainly fertilizers that, people put fertilizers on their crops and then they water them, and that water washes down the fertilizers as well and ends up in the oceans. And definitely in that community, they didn't have the technology to be filtering their water, so it's definitely an extreme, the example I showed you, but it's damaging.
Like, what's the percent, do you know the percentage of people who've been affected by mercury poisoning?
No, I don't know. It's mainly pregnant women who consume mercury. It affects their child and children who are poisoned by mercury as well.
Like, consume mercury, like, consume fish?
Yeah, mercury in fish, because
Is that why pregnant women can't eat sushi while they're pregnant?
yes,
No, I'm not gonna make it my sushi.
sorry, I'll worry about that later.
If you cook your fish, you're fine.
No.
No, really?
I'm keeping my life plan.
Worry about that later, but I'm not couple things.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I have to make a confession. No, I have to make a confession. Like, okay, so the wax papers, all that stuff, like, I try to live a life that is as eco-friendly as I can, as sustainable as I can, because I feel like that's my duty. You know, it's my mandate from God, right? And so I've done all those things. But then I got lazy. And like there was a sale at Costco, right? Because like it's all glass containers. You'll know my kids, like Ethan drops and breaks them, and you know it's all like sustainable stuff, and they hate it because why does everybody else have plastic bags and we don't, right? But they had a sale, and I thought, oh, it's just convenient, and I went and bought a bunch of stuff, and then we just started using plastic, and we stopped using the beeswax, and we stopped, and then. This is convenient for these water bottles, right? But I could have used a pitcher and some glasses, which you'll see tomorrow. So I think it's really important that even though we persevere, we try, we forget, and to just begin again, right? So tomorrow I can begin again, and I can use a pitcher and some glasses, and we can all do that. And I think that's a really good message that like Veronica is saying is that we can all be a part of it, even if we just do one small thing, right?